Okay, Jen, welcome to Competencies Without a Classroom. I'm super pumped to have you here today. For those of you that are just listening and not watching this on YouTube, I'm wearing a collared shirt right now. And I don't remember the last time I've worn a collared shirt because we're filming this during the times of COVID and I've been working from home for months now. So this is a big deal, Jen. I'm super pumped to have you here. And I'm going to start off this interview the same way that we start off every interview that we've had with all of our other guests so far. And it's a pretty important question. It's something that our listeners want the answers to, and it also kind of helps set a tone for the rest of the interview. So with that, Jen, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
This is so controversial, so I love it. And I have friends who just think that I'm out to lunch because I have to have pineapple on my pizza. It's a must-have.
Is that kind of like your go-to when you're having pizza? There's pineapple on it?
It is my go-to, but here's the other brutal fact. I'm allergic to gluten and dairy, so I have to have vegan pizza. And trust me, I know what real pizza tastes like. I miss it every day. So it's a gluten-free vegan cheese pizza with pineapple on it. I mean, just saying that out loud, it makes me sad, but it's all I can eat now.
That's a mouthful. At least you have the pineapple on there to bring some flavor to it. And
exactly.
There's a few other goodies on there. I'm a huge pineapple guy. I'm assuming our listeners are too. So you're starting off on the right foot. Let's keep that train headed in that direction. Jen, so who is Jenn Cutajar and what are you doing for work right now?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm Jenn Cutajar, and my purpose and my passion is really combining two things: bringing amazing technologies to our everyday work and developing incredible talent. I consider myself a real leader, and I love when people on my team get promoted or get a chance to be acknowledged and just really figure out what success means to them.
That's huge. What's a specific way that you might help people with that second point right now?
Yeah, it's about giving them the opportunity to find out, well, what are your values? What's important to you? And how do you combine that for your individual definition of success? I spent the last 2 decades working in corporations, technology corporations, getting to meet and work with all kinds of different people. And what I found over the years is everyone has a different definition of success. And that's so important to get in tune with it for yourself so that you're going down a path that's authentic to you.
Okay, that's a big one. I hope we can unpack that a little bit as we continue to talk, especially for the younger people listening to this, right? When I was in high school, I couldn't tell you what success was going to look like in 10 years, 20 years, and something that I'm still coming back to all the time, right? So, Jen, I know you personally from a relationship we have where you help out as a coach with Clear the Noise coaching, right? Can you talk a little bit about kind of what inspired you to step away from those big corporations that you were just speaking of and wanting to dedicate your life to helping others get to that next level?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've spent the last 2 decades in corporate technology sales, and I love it. There is nothing better than helping a company that's driven by people solve some of their problems. And as I learned and kind of grew up in that environment, I had the real privilege to become a people manager. And through that people management, just had this sense that I always wanted to do more. So I really didn't think I would get the opportunity to do more until a specific birthday.
Right.
But my family had some health needs that required me to leave the corporate world and spend time taking care of a family member. So I'd always had on the back burner to be an entrepreneur, to start my own company. And I knew that I couldn't dedicate the types of hours that are required within a corporation. So I stepped back from the corporate world to take care of my family member. But in that same breath, I needed to stay in the game. Like, I'm ambitious, driven, and I've always loved what I do. So kicking off my own company just seemed like a logical thing. And I launched my coaching company, as you said, Clear the Noise Coaching, to help me stay engaged, do what I love while still having the balance and time to take care of a family member.
That's amazing. And maybe, as we come back to it, that was part of what success looked like to you. Like success isn't just how much money you make or what title you have in your job. It's what personally matters to you, and making sure that you had time to spend with family, especially when they needed it the most. If you're able to do that on your own, that screams success, right?
Oh, yeah. And to that point, Damien, I struggled a little bit with that decision because, like I said, I am ambitious, I am driven. I was at an incredible company and in a role that I had been striving for throughout my career. But when that moment happened and I realized, oh, wow, my life's about to take a shift,
Yeah.
it just made sense.
And good on you for being, we talk a lot about resilience and adaptability on this podcast, for having kind of the mindset to be able to adapt to circumstances and thrive in this new environment, right? So let's say I'm a high school student, Jenn, listening to this, and I'm loving what you've talked about so far from, people management. I really like working with people, and I really like kind of encouraging them or coaching them to kind of level up and be their best self. What does that look like for a 16-year-old who's considering kind of a post-secondary next step, like what to do after high school? Can I go to school to become a life coach? Or, you spoke a little bit about how that happened for you, but what would you recommend to somebody who wants to help somebody else level up?
Yeah, so I believe that having a foundation in a specific career or experiences is really important and was a key criteria for me becoming a coach. I knew that the 2 decades worth of experience I had growing up in technology sales specifically created this incredible foundation that I can lean on as a coach. And as a coach, I'm here to coach and guide people in a direction that's really authentic to them. But where possible, I also share my own experiences so that we have an opportunity to learn from each other and how different situations are handled differently for people.
That's a great answer. I mean, I was hoping you would touch on that becoming a coach isn't something you can likely do out of high school, just because it does take a lot of self-reflection on personal life experiences to be able to do that. You talked about being able to look at those last 2 decades and realize that you'd have the skills and the drive to want to do this. Was there a specific moment or an inflection point that said, yeah, I want to spend more time with my family, and because of what I've done over the last 2 decades, I have these skills? Or kind of what was that trigger point that said, coach, oh yeah, I could do that, I like working with people? Was it just a chance to look back and think about what you've enjoyed over those last 2 decades?
It was definitely a combination. So I was very lucky in my career. I've had a leadership coach, I've had incredible mentors and bosses. And a big part of their mentorship to me was allowing me to learn and grow. So when I thought about becoming a coach, I put the work in. So yes, I had 2 decades of experience, but I went back to school. I secured a certification. I worked towards 500 hours of coaching to have an additional level of certification.
Right.
This is something that I absolutely take seriously.
Yeah.
And that's important, right? The inflection point came again because of life changes, but I was always building towards it just in my day-to-day activities as a people leader in my job, as well as just recognizing, this is a career. I've had leadership coaches who absolutely changed my life, my career trajectory, etc. I knew it was something, I just didn't know it would happen so soon in my life.
Okay. There's a lot of things that happen in our lives that we never expect them to happen when they do, right? But again, it's coming back to that adaptability piece, and something that you just talked about, lifelong learning. It's something that we stress a lot on this podcast as well, is that great, you finish high school, maybe you went to post-secondary, you finished that, but it doesn't mean you're done, right? Life is a marathon, and Jenn recognized an opportunity to level up herself. And with coaching, it's not just, hey, here's what I've done, I'm going to show you and tell you about that. There's real certifications and licenses and education that kind of went into allowing you to have all the skills you need to help those people who come to you to look for the next stage in life, right?
Well, and that lifelong learning is so important because I'll admit it, I wasn't an incredible student in high school, but I was involved, right? I participated in sports, I volunteered. I may not have had the best grades, but I was definitely involved and I found things to be passionate about and to put a lot of energy into. And that mentality has carried me through my entire life. Right now, I'm an entrepreneur with my own company, but I'm always looking for opportunities to learn. I'm plugged into podcasts when I walk my dog. I'm reading the latest books. I'm calling up my friends at companies that I love and want to learn from and say, well, what is on the executive reading list this month?
Right.
They tell me the books and I'm devouring them. Any opportunity to learn, I'm in.
And you know what, Jenn, that's a very important message for everyone listening to this. And that's a good segue as well. So, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but is it safe to say, maybe it wasn't always that way? You weren't always this super confident, super passionate, super driven person. Let's talk about the hog. So in this podcast, we like to do a little section called the hog, where at my blueprint, where I work, during our meetings to make them a bit more efficient, we'll label agenda items with the amount of time that we're going to speak to that item. And then it's either labeled as a decision, discussion, an update, or once a meeting, somebody can speak to the hog, which is something that's going to take a bit more time because it's going to be a bit more important to get talked about at that week's meeting. So for you, Jenn, what is your hog? What is something that is important for the 16-year-olds listening to this to hear that you would have liked to hear when maybe you were 16?
Yeah, so I think it's important to paint the picture of me at 16. So I grew really tall very fast. I was incredibly awkward, 6 feet tall in, I think, about grade 10 or 11. And I tried my best to hide, right? And if I could go back and tell my 16-year-old self how life unfolded, that girl would never believe it. So when I think about 16-year-olds today, it's really what I'd love to tell myself back then. Get out of your own head. You absolutely have a lot to offer. And it's more than okay to speak up, ask questions, have your voice heard instead of holding back or trying to hide your 6 foot tall frame as you walk through life.
Yeah, that's such an important message. It's so different, especially these days too, with social media and everything on display, but just be your authentic, true self, whatever that is, because that's where the happiness comes from, right? Speaking of Instagram, are you on Instagram, Jenn?
No, so I purposefully have a very, very minimal footprint. I love bells and whistles and dings and alerts, and I know myself well enough that I could get sucked into hours of social media. So I purposely, for myself and my own sanity and my workload, I keep it all to a minimum.
Yep, that's super important. I'm very similar in that same sense, at least with Instagram, that it's been off the phone for years now because it is a time suck and I will get distracted. And it's also not authentic to what you were just speaking of, right? Like Instagram often becomes that highlight reel of your best of your showcase, and it's not real, right? So usually I use that question as a segue to ask you to maybe speak to a failure, something that is authentic, something that you have learned the hard way that would be important for the young people listening to this to hear.
Early on in my career, I was known as very responsive and, someone who would just be on all the time. And in this world where we're connected through our phones and work travels with us, especially in this COVID environment, into our homes all the time, my failure, or as I like to call it, big lesson or aha moment, is the fact that I had to recognize that boundaries and saying no is a superpower. And if you're under pressure to achieve a deadline, acknowledge what you can do within that time frame and what you cannot do, and communicate it so that everyone understands where the priorities are. And I know for myself, it took me a while to get good at that. And what suffered was my health. Because what I did was I focused so much on work that I I didn't move enough during the day. I wasn't eating healthy food. I was eating the real cheese, gluten-filled pizza, and my stomach was upset all of the time. So recognizing that it's absolutely okay to set boundaries, that 24 hours a day is not sustainable to work, and to find some joy, that was a huge lesson for me.
Safe to say that's kind of a bit of a burnout, right? Like you
Oh,
had that
for sure. Oh, I
burnout
had a
experience.
burnout. Yeah, I was really, really lucky because I had an incredible boss at the
Hmm.
time who had experienced something similar. And we're both like, okay, how do we want to get to a better place? And how do we bring that better place to the team holistically? Right. So that the team, even under pressure in a sales environment, had the opportunity to say, look, I'm shutting off right now.
Right.
And that's okay. And we're going to support each other.
I mean, your team, no matter what role you're in, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And if you have some weak links on the team, it's going to bring everybody down. So it's important to have a boss or a mentor or somebody in your life that can remind you of that. Can you speak to that maybe a little bit, Jenn? Like, given the world that you've worked in, there's going to be a lot of young people listening to this who are, maybe really anxious about getting the best job or working for the best logo and the best company. But, what I've heard a lot is that it's more important, especially early on, is to work for a great boss than necessarily prioritize the company. Is there any advice or something that a student could do to, like, how do you know when you're interviewing, you're going to talk to somebody that they are a good person for you?
Yeah, it takes a lot of curiosity,
Hmm.
right? And I highly recommend doing your homework. So yes, a boss is really important, and so too is the company and the culture of the company.
Yeah.
There are incredible resources out there for all of us to be curious and research the companies. And then in an interview process, try and find out who you'll be reporting to. Get time with that person, and then also ask to speak to your future colleagues as well, so that you can ask them, well, what is it really like? So, for example, as I said, I grew up in technology sales. That's
Mm-hmm.
a relatively high pressure environment where you have to hit certain goals every 3 months. So, you want to make sure that you're in a supportive environment and have people there to help you get past that finish line.
Yep.
So having the opportunities to be curious and ask questions of your future boss and your future colleagues, that's huge.
That is huge. And now let's put you on the other side of the table, Jenn. So let's put your hiring hat back on, because I'm sure you've done a lot of that over the years as well. Let's say I'm a student listening to this and I've done my research. Jenn is a great boss. I want to work for her. I want to work for this company. But there's somebody else who's also applying for this role and they have the exact same resume as I do. So we look identical on paper. Put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager. What have you found over the years? Like, what's a competency or a soft skill? What is it that you look for that's going to separate one candidate from the other?
Yeah, on paper, when it's identical, that interview process becomes really important. And finding a way to make it conversational
Mm-hmm.
and demonstrate that you've done your research about the company. Base some of your questions on what you've learned already. Demonstrate your curiosity and your willingness to learn and grow. To me, that's the differentiator
Yeah.
versus the person who can say, I have all of these qualifications, but then unfortunately you get on the phone with them and there's nothing more beyond those qualifications.
Yeah. And you can tell that pretty quickly as a hiring manager, especially someone who's done it a few times. So I think if, we sum that up, it's curiosity. And that's one of my favorite kind of competencies. And it's when you're applying for a job, it's really, did you take the time? Like at my blueprint, one of our kind of core values that when we're hiring or when we're doing annual reviews or whatever it is, we measure kind of performance and against these core values. And one of them is wants to be here. So, we're actively hiring for a number of roles right now. And that's probably the biggest thing for me when I'm interviewing people is why my blueprint? Why do you want to work in education, in technology, and why specifically in this company and in this department? So the ones, because you hear it all the time, you can teach skills, you can't teach personality, you can't necessarily teach curiosity or drive. But the ones who really want to be there, they'll tell you, and you'll be able to tell that they've done their research as well. Right?
Well, and they'll be excited about it
Yeah.
too, right? I've seen so many resumes that say highly enthusiastic and motivated,
Yeah.
and then you meet them and none of that comes across. And I get it. People are going to be nervous in a job interview as well. And that's okay. Hiring managers and recruiters understand that. But once you start to feel more comfortable, let your personality shine. It's okay to be vulnerable.
Just comes back to be your true authentic self, and people want that more than ever, especially these days.
Yeah.
So Jenn, you've talked about some experience you had in the world of sales. We've had a few people on this podcast already that come from somewhat of a sales environment. And I like to talk about sales skills as life skills. A lot of the soft skills that I have today come because of my experience in working in an environment like that. What is a life skill that you weren't taught in high school, but maybe that you wish you were?
Listening. The ability to really listen, be curious, and then to engage in conversation.
Yeah.
Those three elements are just so important in life because too often we're living at this incredible pace. We're not actually paying attention. We're not actually listening. We're assuming what's going on. And because of that, we're missing out on so much. So in a way, it's slow down, listen, be curious, and be willing to engage with open and curious questions.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of those kind of cheesy like puns and quotes. So the one that comes to my head originally is, to be interesting, you have to be interested, right? Listening it's huge. Like if you're listening to this and you say, okay, that sounds great, but what does that actually mean? How do I do that? Just Google how to be an active listener. You hear the term active listener a lot, and it's simple things, especially today when we're all glued to our screens. Put the screen down. I feel like an old curmudgeon when I say that now, but like before we started this, put my phone on do not disturb. I turn off notifications on my computer, because you have to be actively listening, not just thinking about what am I going to say next, but what did Jenn actually say and how am I going to respond to that? So that is huge. Yeah.
Well, and to that point, when I was first entering the workforce and meeting people and networking, I was so afraid of saying my own name out loud properly. And I was so in my head that I never actually heard other people's names.
Yeah.
And I missed out on the opportunity to actually hear what they had to say and get to know them. And over the years, being able to get out of my head a little bit, get comfortable saying my own name, has allowed me to make really meaningful connections instead of just missing out completely.
That's huge. And, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with that, Jenn, but we've talked about curiosity a fair bit. I heard something recently, I may be getting it wrong, but the easy way to define curiosity is kind of being more interested in figuring out an answer to a question than you are worried about looking silly, kind of you're just talking about, right? So that's kind of a good way to define it. Do you have any ideas about what someone could do? Like, can you teach curiosity? Is that possible? Or how do you build that muscle? Do you know?
I think it takes practice and a little bit of courage, right? If I go back to what we talked about before, my 16-year-old self was so focused on just not being seen that I missed these great opportunities to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about developing a little bit of courage to test out over time what you're comfortable participating in.
Yeah.
And if that means asking your very first question, then bravo for you. You've made that first move.
Yeah.
If the next day you want to build and ask two questions, well, again, that's a step forward in you building your courage and your abilities to be curious.
Yeah. And honestly, the thing that comes to my mind, and you talked about technology, is just it's an A/B test. So for anyone listening to this who hasn't heard of that term, A/B test is, let's say you send out an identical email, but you change the subject line from A versus B to see if one performs better than the other, right? So try being curious in some of your conversations, and some of them maybe not. And you'll see that the ones where you are curious and you do ask those questions, you're going to have immense gains from that test compared to the one where you didn't ask questions, right?
Yeah, and I love the opportunity to have a little bit of an experiment with yourself. What do you notice about yourself and what do you learn about yourself when you are asking questions?
Yep.
What becomes possible for you? That's really exciting too.
Yep. And you should reflect on that. And if you're going to do something with reflection, a digital portfolio is a great place to do that. So Jen, let's have some fun. Let's do some rapid fire questions. Let's say you have a billboard. Everyone's going to see it. You can write one thing on that billboard. What is it going to say?
Simple. You've got this.
You've got this. Yeah. So
Got this.
just confidence. Don't overthink it. You got it. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. IQ or EQ. So intelligent quotient or emotional quotient. You can only pick one. Which one is it?
I was going to say I like a good combination,
Yeah.
but if I can only pick one, it's emotional intelligence. I believe that really is just so important in life, to be open and learn from others. And that emotional intelligence helps you get there.
Yeah. And in life, you don't have to pick just one. So it is definitely
exactly. Yeah.
It is important to kind of build both of those muscles out, but never overlook the EQ piece. You know, nobody wants the brilliant jerk on their team, right? So it is a combination of the two. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite class in high school, Jen?
No, not really. I high school, it was good, but what I learned more from were all the other activities that I participated in. I was really lucky. I surrounded myself with some really brilliant friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm proud to say that all of my friends are smarter than I am, but they're the ones who helped me grow up and learn about myself, because they were so incredible. They are incredible.
If we go back to one of those cheesy quotes you hear all the time, is that you're the average of the 5 people that you spend your time with, right? So surround yourself with some really good and smart people, and it's going to bump up your average, right?
Yeah.
You talked a lot about wanting to consume and lifelong learning. Is there a book that you've read now that maybe, it's had such an impact in your life that you wish you would have been exposed to it before you're 18?
Absolutely. So The Gifts of Imperfection by Dr. Brene Brown.
Okay.
It's this incredible book that I picked up, I think, only about 5 years ago. But wow, if that had been around when I was younger, it would have, like I said, helped me get out of my head, really allow me to be more purpose driven and get rid of the clutter and all the noise that I thought was so important. So yeah, that book changed my life.
I'm only recently getting turned on to Brene Brown. If you guys just Google her, you're going to find a bunch of stuff. I think she has a pretty powerful TED Talk. My partner is reading her book called Dare to Lead. I know she's done a lot of research around shame, right? And how people kind of reflect on their own shame. So that sounds like a great book. We'll link to it in the show notes for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Jen, let's do this one. Repeat and finish the sentence for me. Okay. If I was 18 again, I would.
If I was 18 again, I would be far more confident and take a little bit more risk. Yeah, definitely take more risk.
Yeah. Comes back to, you've got this. Just do it. Right?
Just try different things.
Yeah. I got one more cheesy quote. I don't know why, but they keep surfacing for me. I'm a big believer of I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. And you got to take that in the right context. Like, don't do anything silly, but just take a swing. Go for it. You've got this, especially when you're young, right? Go for it. Okay. So hypothetical scenario, Jen, to close things out. You're the superintendent of a school board. You're tasked with deciding one competency. So one skill, soft skill, transferable skill, call it what you want. But this is one skill that every student needs to display evidence of in their digital portfolio in order to graduate. What is that skill?
In their digital portfolio. I know we've been talking a lot about curiosity, and I think being able to demonstrate that, because it highlights listening skills and the ability to research, I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing one that I wish every student would at least learn about and then work to display evidence of for sure. Okay, Jen, I'm going to put you on the spot one last time. What's an interesting thing you've learned from these last couple of years in coaching people? What's one kind of free little nugget of coaching advice that you can give to our listeners?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is be kind to yourself. We put so much pressure on ourselves and care, I guess in quotations, care so much about what other people think, that we're not being kind to our true, authentic selves. Yeah. So to me, that's the biggest part about coaching right now, because people are just under so much pressure, and we need to step back, be kind to ourselves, and really be clear on what's important to us right now. Be okay with that.
Couldn't think of a better way to wrap this up. So guys, thank you for listening. Be kind to yourself. Jenn, have a great day.
Great. Thank you.